This is Kelsey Kloboski. I'm a senior digital accessibility specialist here at Accessible Web. And today we are going to be talking about vetting the tech, component libraries, and a brief definition of component libraries. That's where we're talking about pre-written code or pre-written components that you are looking at using in your website or in your product, and some strategies for evaluating those component libraries when you're deciding on which component library or which components that you want to use in your digital projects. So a quick agenda for my discussion today is we'll talk about kind of three phases of making a decision on whether to use a component library or not. And I'll talk about researching component libraries, evaluating component libraries, and then requesting fixes, and particularly looking at the accessibility considerations and some practical advice when going through these phases in deciding on whether to use a particular component library. So our first phase, researching component libraries, I sort of have three tests that I would encourage you to do to help you decide on whether to continue considering using that component library or whether you should stop and move on to another option and see what else is out there. So our first test, if the component library doesn't meet these, I recommend treating that as a stoplight. This is probably not going to be a good component library for you to use from an accessibility perspective. We recommend continuing your search. If you are researching a component library and their guidance and documentation does not mention accessibility at all, that's likely a stoplight that you should consider moving on and not going with that component library. Or if they don't provide a way to report bugs, barriers, or other issues. These types of component libraries are likely not going to be a good option when it comes to digital accessibility. Our second set of tests where we can, if they pass here, we can proceed with caution. If the component library documents that they follow a specific standard or regulation, such as they talk about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and a specific conformance level, or they may talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act or the European Union accessibility requirements, that's usually an indication that they are at least thinking about accessibility. If they provide a detailed accessibility report, and if they report that they conduct testing with people with disabilities. So these are generally good signs that they're thinking about accessibility, and that this may be a component library that you can move forward with. And for our third test, a green means go. These are really strong indicators that this is likely going to be a good accessibility partner for you, is if they go beyond just saying that they care about accessibility or talking about specific conformance or specific guidelines that they meet, and they actually describe their accessibility process and strategies, or if it's a component library that is created and maintained by people with disabilities. So not just testing with people with disabilities, but people with disabilities are working in this component library directly. Those are definitely strong signs that this is likely going to be a good accessibility partner, and we can move on to the second phase of our evaluation. Some practical advice when you're researching your component libraries is some advice I have for reading accessibility reports. So they may offer an accessibility conformance report, or often presented in a VPAT template, that stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. I wanted to give some advice if you're not familiar with reading accessibility reports or haven't looked at too many of them. Some pieces to look at. So a warning sign that the accessibility report is not going to be as useful, or that maybe accessibility is not as high of a priority for this component library, is if their report has not been updated in 2 or more years, if it does not document any assistive tech testing, if it does not include any details about scoping, methodology, or evaluation, or if the report either doesn't mention user testing or the details about the user testing are really vague. So those might be some signs that the report is either not as thorough as we would want, or that accessibility isn't as high of a priority in terms of doing due diligence around making sure their components are accessible. Some good signs on the other side of that, some good signs that of a more solid accessibility report and a higher priority on accessibility is if the report has been updated in the past year, if it documents assistive tech and identifies the specific tools and software that were used in the testing, If it includes details about scoping, methodology, and evaluation that was used to create the report, and if user testing includes specific details about the specific tools or software that were used, and or the disabilities that were represented in the testing group. So see here an accessibility report that provides more detail and provides more information about that process, and is specific about how users were included in the testing process, is likely indicates a stronger priority around accessibility and that it's going to be a stronger component library overall in this area. So let's move on to kind of phase two of making a decision about our component library, which is evaluating it. So our first test, where if it's failing at this point, I wouldn't recommend moving on with them, is if you run an automated scanner on their components or on their component library, and it identifies, the automated scanners identify significant failures. We know that automated scanners can only capture a portion of accessibility requirements or accessibility items that we would care about. And if an automated scanner is already catching a lot of significant issues, chances are that if you dig further, there's going to continue to be more issues. So that can be a good kind of first quick test to see, is this worth continuing to look at this component library, or should we keep looking for another partner? And a second one is that components cannot be used with keyboard alone. This is often a first or go-to manual testing strategy is keyboard navigation. So if doing a quick keyboard test doesn't return good results, that can also be a good indication that it may not be worth your time to dig further. And we'll talk about this a bit more, keyboard navigation testing a bit more on the next slide, but this can be a good kind of initial test to help indicate whether it's a good use of your time to continue researching or looking into this component library. Our second set of tests, that if it's doing well here, we can maybe proceed with caution that these are some signs that it's more likely to be a good accessibility partner, is if you conduct a manual audit or manual testing and you find few or no issues. User testing provides mixed or neutral feedback about the component library. And within either of those two testing categories, if the issues that are identified, whether through your manual audit or through user feedback, if those issues are within your team's ability to address, whether it's in your technical capability or there are settings within the component library where those issues can be addressed, then that may still be a reasonable component library to work with. And our third set of tests, green means go. These are really strong signs that this is likely to be a good accessibility partner, is if user testing provides neutral to positive feedback. And then that same caveat of if you do identify any issues that they're within your team's ability to address. So let's talk about some practical advice around evaluating component libraries. First, I definitely recommend that if possible to test in a demo or unmodified version of the components. Ideally, we want to be testing components that are going to be as they first appear to you, kind of, or another way of thinking of it is out of the box when you first start using the components. If we're looking at the components on a live site that another organization has implemented, you may be evaluating a component that they've made changes to, which might have either worsened or improved the accessibility. So it's really valuable to evaluate an unmodified version of the component so you can get a clear picture of what your team's going to actually be working with and possibly needing to make accessibility corrections on. You can also use browser extension automated scanners. Got to shout out our accessible web helper that is available for free in the Chrome store and runs the Axe Core rule set. So that is a tool that is available to do an automated scan. Again, only catches, like all automated scanners, only captures a portion of accessibility issues, but can be a useful first check to, again, decide if it's worth your time to dig further into this component library. We want to use manual review and testing, such as keyboard navigation, and then in any user testing or user feedback that we gather on a component library, I recommend in this area to focus on interactions and functionality, and any issues that are uncovered or problematic feedback about the components, you can gather good questions about the library. So some examples here might be if user testing reports, hey, the accessible names, the names of these buttons are confusing, the names of the descriptions of the images are not clear, then we can gather some good questions about, can we edit accessible names in this component library? Can we add image descriptions? Thinking about if some of the issues that arise, you can ask good questions about, is this something that's fixable within this component library or not? And here I wanted to jump over and do a quick live demonstration of checking out a component library. So I'm going to switch screens real quick. So what I've pulled up on the screen is an example of a tooltip from the React Aria component library. This is put out by Adobe. I'm on a publicly available page. I have not fully vetted or tested this component library overall, so I'm not making any commentary or evaluation on this component library specifically, but just wanted to kind of walk through some of the steps live that I would do as part of these sort of initial assessments to understand if this is a component or a component library that I might want to pursue further. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to run a scan of this page using our browser extension. So doing that first step of let's check it out with an automated scanner and see if that finds any major issues. So I'm activating scan page. My scanner's running and it pulled up a congrats, there are no automated scan errors on this page. Cool. So this is a good first step. I don't want to abandon this immediately. As we know, this is only checking a portion of things, but at least I know there's no major automated scanning issues present on this page. And now I want to do a little manual testing of this tooltip component. The tooltips are a really common component or widget that we see in websites and web apps. And what this component does is it's showing a button with an icon of a pencil. When I mouse over that button, after a brief pause, there's a pop-up of text edit. So I think it's intended to give me a little bit more information about what's this pencil button going to do when I activate it. So there's a couple of things I want to think about. First, I want to think about keyboard testing. I'm able to get this edit text to pop up with my mouse. Can I get that edit text to pop up when I use keyboard navigation alone? So I'm going to move my mouse away so that the edit text goes away. To do this testing, I'm going to use my mouse to click. I'm going to try to click right above this button. My hope is that I've moved my computer's focus right above the button. Now I'm going to press my tab key. And when I press the tab key, oh, I messed it up because I moved my mouse. Let me try that again. All right, I press my tab key, I bring that button into focus. I can see focus is indicated with a purple outline, and that edit text has popped up. So to me, this function of this component, that it pops up this edit text, it worked when I did it with a mouse. It worked when I moved focus there with my keyboard. So for me, this is a pass on this keyboard test. Another manual test that I would do as part of my full manual audit here would be to look at, we have some requirements under the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines about content exposed on hover. So when I hover it with my mouse, if content pops up, it's got a couple of tests related to that. So one test I want to see is this pop-up content persistent? Does it stay visible while I'm leaving my mouse on the button? Maybe I need extra time to read it, I need extra time to find it. Does it stay there? And it does. As I've been speaking, the edit text has remained visible while my mouse is hovering it. So for me, this is a pass of that persistent test. Now I want to see is this text hoverable? Can I move my mouse over it and it stays visible? This is really important if I use my mouse for tracking text as I'm reading, or I might have assistive tech that requires me to run my mouse over text in order for it to be read or for it to be modified visually. So I want to make sure I can move my mouse pointer over that edit text and that it's not going to disappear when I do that. I've moved my mouse over it and that edit text is still there. I can move my cursor back and forth over it and it remains visible. So that's a pass. And then my last test for this type of content is I want to see if it's dismissible. This can be really important if maybe this pop-up text is maybe blocking something important behind it. And maybe as a user, I want to be able to get rid of that text, but without moving my mouse, without moving my keyboard focus. The most common strategy here is for the escape key to dismiss content that's been exposed on hover. I'm going to press my escape key and that edit text disappears. So that's the first time it's disappeared. It stayed in place while I was hovering the button. It stayed in place while I hovered the text. It disappeared when I pressed the escape key. So far this component is doing great. And then probably from here, I would go into screen reader testing, getting user feedback, going through other manual tests that I think are relevant to this component. But just as a quick demonstration of some of the tests that we would want to do in a component library when making a decision of whether to use this library. I'm going to jump back over to my slides. All right, so when we have evaluated our component library, it's performing well, or performing it either we haven't identified any issues or we've identified a few issues that we think are fixable, then we're ready to move on to kind of phase three of our decision making, which is requesting fixes from component libraries. This is a really important piece to keep in mind because we can't assume that a component that's currently has good accessibility is going to stay that way. Bugs can pop up, or accessibility requirements may change, accessibility practices may change. So we want to make sure that we're working with a component library that's going to be responsive to accessibility issues that are reported, and ideally any other issues that are reported, but for our purposes, we're talking specifically about accessibility changes. So our first test, and these should be a stoplight, probably don't continue with this component library if these are true, is when reaching out to a component library with a bug report or an accessibility issue, if they do not respond at all, if they respond but don't actually address the issue that you've raised, or if they promise to add it to their feature request list and they don't provide any sort of timeline or maybe a really lengthy timeline for when that fix is going to be made. These are indications that they're either not going to be very responsive to bug reports in general, or accessibility issues are not a very high priority. And so that can be a reason to maybe not go with a component library if their response platform or their response processes aren't very responsive. Our second test, which is maybe, hey, this is getting better, this is an indication that they may be a good partner, proceed with caution, is if they provide custom configuration instructions to address the issue you've reported, or if they promise to add it to their feature request list, but that timeline is maybe a little bit lengthy, 6 months or more, or depending on your field or depending on the expectations there. But they've got a feature request, they give you an actual timeline, but it's going to take a while. So at least, accessibility is on their radar, they're responding to you, but this is going to be a longer term fix, or the custom configurations means that you have to do more of that accessibility work yourself, and they're not fixing it at the source of the issue in their own library. And our third test, green means go. These are really strong indicators. I would consider these signs that this is likely going to be a good accessibility partner, is if they provide instructions for using a built-in solution. So kind of referring to one of my earlier examples, let's say you file a bug of, hey, like we ran into, there's an image in this component and the image description is not very good, right? The image description needs more detail. And then they come back and say, hey, like there's a setting here, you update this setting and you can modify the image description as much as you want. It's built in, or there's a field that you can edit. If they've already got a built-in solution, that's a really great sign that they've thought deeply about the accessibility of their widget. They've thought about that it's going to be used in different contexts and for different purposes. And they've got already settings and solutions in place for optimizing the component for your own use. So that's a really strong sign that this is a solid accessibility partner. Another good sign, maybe it is an issue that is coming from their code, coming from their library, and they actually publish a fix and maybe on a quick turnaround, like 6 weeks or less. That's a really good sign that accessibility is a high priority and they're responsive to accessibility barriers when they're brought up. Or a third positive response is if they continue that conversation. We know that accessibility is a spectrum. There can be a lot of gray areas. There can be a lot of subjective considerations or subjective decision making. But if they're engaging with that conversation with you and having a discussion about why changes may or may not be implemented or why certain accessibility practices are or aren't in place, that can still be a good sign of an accessibility partner because it shows they're taking accessibility questions seriously and are really engaging and being thoughtful with it. So maybe even if you don't land on the same interpretation of accessibility needs, having a solid conversation about it is still a good sign that they are likely to be a good accessibility partner going forward. And some practical advice when you're requesting fixes or requesting changes. First is to treat accessibility as a deal-breaking bug, because it is. It should be. If we're caring about accessibility, we need to bring that priority to our selection of tools and third-party content and third-party code that we're using. Provide clear documentation, and that includes practices like describe the issue and the barrier it creates, document what you were using, so your operating system, your browser, and any assistive technology that were used when you encountered the barrier or encountered the issue that you're reporting. And also in your report, emphasize the importance of this issue to you. So talk about accessibility as a high priority and talk about accessibility as a key deciding factor. I think that can be really powerful when you're explicitly saying, like, the accessibility of this library is going to be a deciding factor in whether or not we use this library. That can be really a really powerful statement, really motivating to third-party vendors, and reflects your commitment to accessibility and your commitment to wanting to work with them on improving the accessibility of the library. All right, and how Accessible Web can help. Well, we offer web accessibility software that can be useful for documenting and tracking accessibility issues, including things like our automated scanner for vetting components or our guided manual audit tool for guiding you through manual tests on pages and audits. We also offer full accessibility audits, which we can do to support auditing your website or your web app, evaluating for the web content accessibility guidelines, and providing you detailed feedback on those issues and what we think needs to be done in order to fix them. We offer consulting and training, so including expert guidance and training sessions on implementing and maintaining accessibility standards. And I know have done consulting on assisting some of our clients with vetting third-party tools, third-party code that they're looking at implementing. That's something that we can support with on a consulting basis. And we also can prepare voluntary project accessibility templates, which is a formal report reporting on the results of our accessibility audits and reviews. So those are the ways that Accessible Web can support you in your overall accessibility journey, including component libraries and including content and code you're creating yourself. And